Policy implications of macroeconomic theories. Welcome to our 12th topic in this course, in which we will discuss how economic policy is viewed and implemented. Please read Chapter 12 in the textbook. This topic will discuss how economic policies are influenced by macroeconomic theories. You will learn about 1. How economists classify economic policies and what it means for policy. 2. What economic policymakers do. 3. What current macroeconomic theories are influencing economic policies. 4. Why the third wheel of macroeconomic policy is industrial policy. 5. Why past and future economic policy failures, based on the latest mainstream theory, will force macroeconomic theory to continue its evolution. Okay, let's begin. Our starting point is to ask, how is economic policy determined? Policy prescriptions generally employ one of three methods of analysis, which all can coexist. 1. A positive or objective approach. 2. A normative or subjective approach. And 3. A political economy approach. The first two are widely discussed in textbooks, while the third is less common, but has a long-standing history. The positive economics approach is one that focuses on the facts, description, and explanation of the channels affecting an economic phenomenon. This is an objective perspective of an economic situation. John Neville Keynes, the father of John Maynard Keynes, described this positive approach as forming a body of systematized knowledge concerning what is, understanding those cause and effect relationships and circumstances that create a certain economic outcome, allows a policymaker to craft a response to an adverse effect, or to develop a policy to reinforce a beneficial economic effect for similar or near similar circumstances. This perspective also has been thought of as the economic science. The normative economics approach builds a body of systematized knowledge discussing criteria of what ought to be, as John Neville Keynes wrote. In other words, this approach is the study of what should be, based on an individual's or group's beliefs. Issues such as inequality and poverty measurement, welfare economics, the theory of social choice, the theory of bargaining, and of cooperative games are ripe with normative policy recommendations. This approach also has been dubbed the economic art. The third form of a policy perspective, which is called political economics, or the application of economics, is less commonly discussed in the macroeconomics textbooks. The political economics approach is viewed as an extension of positive economics, but does not exclude normative judgments. Some suggest that this methodology attempts to internalize political decision-making, the policy choice, and most often includes objectives beyond traditional economics. John Neville Keynes opined that political economics must account for ethical, social, and political considerations that lie outside the sphere of traditional economic science. Economic policy draws on all three methods, as the science, art, and application of economics. What do economic policymakers do? There are 6 main tasks of economic policymakers. 1. Enforce the rules and legislative objectives. This would include monetary policymakers that are guided by legislative objectives. 2. Craft tax and spending policies. 3. Issue and manage the country's currency. In the United States, this function would be handled by the U.S. Department of Treasury. 4. In limited ways and at times, produce goods and services. The areas where governments may be responsible for such production and services include providing healthcare and educational services, or sometimes transport services and energy production. In some economies, Now, you might be thinking that would not apply in the United States, but that would be incorrect. In September 1950, the U.S. Congress passed the Defense Production Act, which was modeled on the War Powers Acts of 1941 and 1942, that gave President Roosevelt the authority to control the domestic economy during World War II. The law focuses on the ability of the domestic industrial base to supply materials and services for the national defense, and to prepare for and respond to military conflicts, natural or man-caused disasters, or acts of terrorism within the United States. The Council on Foreign Relations wrote that the original Defense Production Act gave the President a broad set of powers, including the ability to set wages and prices, as well as ration consumer goods, though not all of these powers have been renewed. The law has been continually reauthorized by Congress, most recently in the National Defense Authorization Act of 2019. It is set to expire in 2025. Presidents Donald Trump and Joe Biden both invoked the Defense Production Act in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The law gives the President significant emergency authority to control domestic industries. Trump used the law to crack down on hoarding, limit exports of medical goods, and increase production of critical supplies. Biden has used it to speed up vaccination and testing efforts. 5. Fix problems. 6. Negotiate trade pacts with other countries. Can macroeconomics inform us about the most desirable policy to implement today? Yes, with limitations. Macroeconomic theories, empirical techniques, and studies continue to evolve as an economy's institutions, technology, and demographics also evolve. As such, macroeconomic policy prescriptions for business, monetary, or fiscal policies will change over time. Today's recommendations may very well not be tomorrow's recommendations. What is the relationship between macroeconomic theories and economic policy? Probably one of the most succinct answers to this question was offered by Nobel Prize-winning economist Joseph E. Stiglitz, who observed that Keynes rightly pointed out that policy is shaped by theories. This view is held throughout the economics profession. What is industrial policy? An industrial policy is a macroeconomic program or plan created by the federal government to promote development for selected industries, or for targeted economic development policies, or the retrenchment of selected industries. An industrial policy is a political economy application, and is a third wheel of a macroeconomic approach, which operates alongside traditional monetary and fiscal policy. One example of an industrial policy is climate programs to mitigate the negative effects on the economy. Although an industrial policy might seem like a natural part of economic policy, the IMF has raised concern about the surge in industrial policies around the world. An IMF report issued in April 2024 said, "Economists have long debated the merits and drawbacks of industrial policy. These measures can help address market failures, such as interventions related to the climate transition. But industrial policy is costly, and can lead to various forms of government failures, ranging from corruption to misallocation of resources. Industrial policies can also lead to damaging cross-border spillovers, raising the risk of retaliation by other countries, which can ultimately weaken the multilateral trading system and worsen geoeconomic fragmentation." As such, the IMF has begun tracking industrial policies, and reported that in 2023, there were 2,500 industrial policy interventions around the world, with over a third of those targeted to competitiveness, almost 30% targeted to climate mitigation, and the remaining interventions targeted to security of local supplies, geopolitical concerns, and national security. Let's explore these objectives a bit further. What are the stated objectives of industrial policy? The IMF list of industrial policy objectives are: 1. National security. An official stated motive of the action refers explicitly to the current or future military security of the implementing country or specifically quotes national security. 2. Geopolitical concerns. An official stated motive refers to countering the risk from a country or a class of countries, for example autocracies, even in the absence of a specific reference to national security. Sanctions against Russia related to the war in Ukraine are considered based on a geopolitical concern. 3. Resilience or security of supply, that is, non-food supply. An official stated motive of the action refers to improving the stability or security of local supplies of non-food products, now or in the future. 4. Domestic competitiveness in strategic sectors. An officially stated motive of the action refers to the promotion of domestic competitiveness or innovation in a strategic product or sector. 5. Climate change mitigation and other environmental objectives. An official stated motive of the action refers to climate change mitigation or the transition to a low-carbon economy. So, these are the objectives, but how do they materialize in economies? What are the types of industrial policy? 1. Export barriers, including export bans, tariffs and quotas, export licensing and other export-related trade barriers. An example is the export control measures targeting 30 drone-related products implemented by China in January 2023. 2. Import barriers, including import bans, tariffs and quotas, import licensing, and other import-related trade barriers. For example, the import licensing requirements on laptops, computers, and servers by India implemented in January 2023. 3. Domestic subsidies, including tax rebates, grants, state loans and loan guarantees, price stabilization measures, production subsidies, and other incentives to domestic production. For example, the financial grant of €6.5 billion to compensate energy-intensive companies at risk of carbon leakage from higher fuel prices in Germany. 4. Export incentives, including tax-based export incentives, unit-based export subsidies, trade financing and other financial export promotion. For example, in September 2023, the Brazilian Development Bank provided 2 loans to aircraft manufacturer Embraer to support its export operations. 5. Foreign direct investment measures, including entry and ownership requirements, as well as foreign direct investment screening decisions. For example, the measure adopted by Russia in January 2023 grants authorization for certain companies to exclude the votes of shareholders from unfriendly countries. 6. Procurement policies, covering changes to public procurement law or practice that may favor local suppliers, such as the steps taken by the United States in March 2023, motivated by national security considerations, to favor domestic firms in government contracts for circuit boards. 7. Localization incentives or requirements, as well as public procurement localization measures, include, for example, the local content requirements in the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act. Okay. So far, we have discussed the objectives of industrial policies, then the types of industrial policies. The next question is, what are the product or service categories of industrial policy? Now, we get down to specific areas where the IMF has found industrial policies flourishing around the world. Those areas are: 1. Low-carbon technology. Low-carbon technologies include technologies and machines such as wind turbines, solar panels, biomass systems, and carbon capture equipment. Low-carbon technology products produce less pollution than their traditional energy counterparts and can play a role in the transition to a low-carbon economy. 2. Dual-use products. Dual-use items are goods, software, and technology that can be used for both civilian and military purposes. 3. Critical minerals. Minerals necessary for producing a broad range of goods used in everyday life and modern technologies. 4. Advanced technology products. Products relating to medical and industrial applications of advanced scientific discoveries, medical science, optoelectronics, products that are able to process increased volumes of information, electronics, robotics, materials that allow for further development and application of other advanced technologies, such as optical fiber cable and video disks, aerospace products, and nuclear technology. 5. Semiconductors. Besides semiconductors, materials and products that allow for further development and application of semiconductor-related technologies. 6. Medical products. Medical consumables or non-durable products, including medicines and vaccines, and medical equipment. 7. IT or digital services. Technological research, digital or IT services. So, are these industrial policies aptly addressing market failure? Or are they damaging cross-border spillovers, raising the risk of retaliation by other countries, which can ultimately weaken the multilateral trading system and worsen geo-economic fragmentation? That is the question that the IMF has raised, but the answer is unclear. Although we will not address mercantilism in any depth, which is covered in the textbook in advanced questions, it should be noted that it was, maybe, the original industrial policy. Mercantilism was an economic system that existed in Europe between about 1600 and 1800. It was based on the idea that a nation that traded goods with other nations should seek to increase its exports but limit imports to accumulate larger international reserves of gold, which could be used to build its military might and economic power. Neo-mercantilism returned in the 1880s after Germany's first Chancellor Otto von Bismarck abandoned free trade, in the aftermath of the long 1873 Depression, and embraced the protectionist economic policies. Today, modern mercantilism shares the objectives of the original view in pursuing a policy that encourages exports and discourages imports, but also may use capital controls, which are government or central bank imposed policies to restrict the flow of capital in and out of the domestic economy, through regulations, tariffs, taxes, or any other restrictions, and currency intervention by the government or central bank, to keep the country's exchange rate undervalued to make its exports more competitive and imports more expensive. In an article prepared for the World Economic Forum in 2019, author Paul Rawlinson noted that the unforeseen return of neo-mercantilism, particularly in the U.S. under President Trump, was based on the false premise that one country can only make economic gains at the expense of another. It holds that every deal has a winner and a loser, and nothing can be mutually beneficial. Moreover, the Wilson Center's William Christ also observed that a number of countries, including Japan, South Korea, China, and some other countries in the Far East, pursue a neo-mercantilism model in which they embrace policies to grow through an aggressive expansion of exports. Therefore, it seems that industrial policies definitely are here to stay, and are a third wheel of macroeconomic economic policy along with monetary and fiscal policy. Let me finally say, you do not need to remember all the nuances of industry policies that we discussed based on the IMF research. That was the background for your understanding of the broad concept, which is all you need to know. How do different macroeconomic theories address different economic conditions? Different macroeconomic theories address economic problems based on their framework and emphasis. This table looks at economic conditions from inflation to economic growth, and offers a summary of how different economic schools or perspectives would address the economic problem. Some theories focus on the short-run economic maladies, such as the Keynesian and modern monetary schools. Others focus on the long run, such as the Austrian, new fiscal theory, and new classical schools. If the economy is fully self-correcting, then theories, such as the Austrian school, would not interfere with those adjustments. On the other hand, if the economy cannot fully correct, then policies would likely advocate some policy intervention. Economic theories provide some guidance for policymakers, but there are always dissenting economic views. How do economists and economic policymakers know if a shock to an economy is transitory or permanent? This question is fresh off of the post-COVID-19 pandemic when inflation surged, and monetary policymakers argued that the surge was just transitory, until it was not. The simple answer to this question is that neither economists nor policymakers know initially whether a shock is temporary or lasting, and only time will tell. Obviously, this poses a problem for policymakers, since a one-time impact on the economy may not require a policy action, but an ongoing effect might. One of the new tools that policymakers have is what is called nowcasting. How is nowcasting helping economic policymakers? Economists are increasingly using what is termed nowcasting, which is a blending of the words now and forecasting, to provide real-time estimates of growth and inflation within an economy, and offering the potential for faster policy response to changing economic conditions. These estimates are based on statistical models that attempt to cobble together disparate information, to provide a very timely reading on the state of the economy. I should note that Wall Street economists, of which I was one, always did that to track the economy. However, today those estimates are provided by Federal Reserve Bank research, which, by virtue of the organization, gives those estimates more financial market credibility. As a final question, has macroeconomic theory failed policymakers? This is a debatable question. However, Professor Joseph Stiglitz has forcefully argued that macroeconomic theory has failed policymakers because it failed to predict the 2008 global financial crisis, or the duration of the subsequent recession. Indeed, he asserted a view held much earlier by the late University of Chicago professor Milton Friedman, that the test of science is prediction, and on that basis Stiglitz criticized mainstream macroeconomic theories as flawed. Stiglitz offered his view for macroeconomic theory to be effective for policymakers. It must accurately answer three basic questions. 1. What is the source of a disturbance or shock in the economy? 2. Why do seemingly small shocks have such large effects and can create global contagion? 3. Why do deep downturns last so long? Or, in other words, why does there seem to be such persistence? To be sure, economists have focused attention on these problems, and will continue to search for new answers to these important policy questions. This concludes this topic. Take a moment to consider the questions on this slide as thought questions.